Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Legendarium podcast. This is part 5 of our Silmarillion read-along covering chapters 13 through 15. As a reminder, we have a total of 11 sections scheduled, covering an average of 25 pages each, give or take, which, by the way, guys, is exactly how many pages we read for today, although I know it probably felt more like 100 at certain points during this reading. Anyway, the purpose of this read-along, as a reminder, is not to turn us all into Tolkien scholars, but simply to have some fun with a notoriously difficult book and hopefully glean some of its lessons along the way. If you're not subscribed to the show, you can do so at thelegendarium.com, where you can also find the links to Discord, Patreon, etc. All right, let's get right to it. I am your host, Craig Hanks, and with me over there, well, he's drier than chapter 14 and just as much fun to read. It's Ryan Bruckman.
And I cause as much sleep deprivation.
Deprivation?
Yeah.
Clearly I'm dealing with
You're
one
actually,
of them.
you're a victim of it. Well, and he's so stupid, he probably doesn't even know the difference between Finrod, Fingon, Fingolfin, and Finarfin. It's Kyle Lemon.
You can just shut the fin up. I don't know.
So, welcome, guys. It is part 5 of our Silmarillion read-through. This is, it's an interesting one because as a section, these 25 pages, these 3 chapters, taken as a whole, not that bad. It's just chapter 14 is really, it kills me. Every time I read it, I'm trying to figure out why it's there.
It reminds me...
Could this not have been done some other way?
Chapter 14 reminded me, and this is, I'm going to get so much hate for this probably, but it's like when my wife tells me a story and she gives me a ton of backstory and detail that is completely irrelevant and unnecessary. Or, I mean, maybe not completely irrelevant, but unnecessary.
Yeah. And
it's like all these details, and then you get to like the actual meat of it, and it's like, this could have been 30 seconds.
Yeah.
This could have been an email.
This could have been an email.
We're going to get to chapter 14 in just a moment. I do have a recap for you guys this time. As you may recall, Fëanor and his sons, leaving the Blessed Realm, land in Middle-earth and burn the Teleri ships that they have stolen. They actually landed pretty close to Morgoth's realm, and he immediately attacks them before they have a chance to settle in. It's a long battle, but the elves are victorious. In his pride and general idiocy, Fëanor pursues the forces of Morgoth, outrunning the others in his army. So he's ahead of everybody else. And predictably, the evil army sees this, turns around, and a bunch of Balrogs deal Fëanor his death wounds. So Fëanor dies, and that's pretty much that for our central character, so-called central character. Morgoth then calls for a parley, offering a truce, and Maedhros, the eldest son of Fëanor, goes to meet with him. Whoops, just kidding. Instead of peace, Morgoth takes Maedhros, hangs him by his right wrist off a cliff. And meanwhile, while all this is going on, Fingolfin's people have crossed the dreaded grinding ice in the far north and arrived in Middle-earth. And as you can imagine, they and Fëanor's people are not thrilled to see each other. But Fingon, son of Fingolfin, goes on a solo quest and rescues Maedhros minus one hand. This act of bravery starts the reconciliation process between the two groups. And that's just chapter 13. In chapter 14, we find out that Middle-earth has lots of forests, mountains, and rivers, and that various groups of elves live in, on, or near them. And in chapter 15, Turgon sets up a hidden realm in Gondolin, and Thingol, king of the Grey Elves, finds out the truth behind why the Noldor have come back to Middle-earth in the first place. And he's not thrilled about this. And that's the end of this section. So, there we go.
Chapter 14 is just a strange tangent.
It really is.
Mid-season drama here.
I think we're going to have plenty of things to talk about, I think, with chapters 13 and 15. But let's talk about 14 for just a moment, because it's kind of the giant elephant in the episode, being the most boring chapter in the book. And I want to say that that's an objective... that's an objective statement. I'm not totally sure, but I
There might be some
anyone.
very strong cartographer feelings that would disagree with you, because you could map out a lot of off of what was in there.
You know, one of the frustrating things to me in this read through on that note was that they do splice in a map insert in chapter 14. If you're reading this, Ryan, you would see this, but you're listening to it, you weirdo.
I still hop in.
Okay, so do you know what I'm talking about? This map insert? Mm-hmm. What's weird about it is that it probably names I don't know, 30-40% of the landmarks that are actually listed in the chapter. And so you're reading through the chapter, at least I am, and I'm constantly going to this map that they provide, or you flip to the one in the back and you're like, wait a minute, where's this? This river it's by what now? And it's not even on there. And sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. He's naming minor branches of mid-sized rivers. And these are the people that live by this branch of the river, and of course it doesn't show up on the map, and I don't know. I get really frustrated with
Chapter
that.
14 should be lifted, placed in the back in its own like special index section, and just that.
The appendices. We need appendices.
But its own thing. And not even in the appendices, just its own thing. This is like Tolkien's like
author's note.
Yeah, author's note. He's going ham on things that he's going to geek out about, and just there you go.
And, to Ryan's point about cartographers, getting a little bit of a, oh, dang, that would be inappropriate for our 10-year-old listener, getting excited about this chapter, that totally makes sense. I can see Tolkien actually either working from a map or writing this down with the intention of it being able to be mapped out. But it's like, I really, really didn't need to read this. With some caveats. Okay, so this is the part where I say, all right, chapter 14 is not all bad. Okay. There was the way back of when the elves had just arrived in Aman, and I told you guys to highlight the chapter where the 7 sons of Fëanor are listed out, and you get some of their personality traits, or at least nicknames that hint at their personalities and that sort of thing, where you've got the family tree in the back. You can always flip to that. But that page is important or possibly valuable just as a reference point to go back and say, oh, okay, so this guy is super proud. This guy is very crafty. This guy is clever, whatever. It gives you that kind of character reference. In a similar way, we do get a little bit more color and flavor for the landscape than you would get with, a little black and white map insert, no matter how detailed it was. You are going to get a little bit more of that feeling of, I feel a little bit more what it would be like to live in this forest or under the shadow of these mountains with all the spiders, or whatever. Mm-hmm. So you get some of that flavor, but that's not to say that it's terribly exciting to read. So still a punchline, but I don't want to be too hard on it. So I don't know. Any other thoughts on chapter 14?
It is what it is. I mean, it's you muscle
very deep.
You muscle through it, and if that's something you like, dig in more. There's a wealth of information in there.
Yeah.
Is it all applicable and relevant? Up to the reader, I guess.
It depends on what is it that you need to get out of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Well, shall we talk about chapter 13 then? Because a lot happens in that chapter. This is definitely a packed one. But the first thing that we should probably talk about is Fëanor. So Fëanor is the guy, he's the driver behind so much of the story so far, with the creation and the loss of the Silmarils, the oath, the kinslaying, all of that stuff. And we get to Middle-earth, and it's like, all right, so Fëanor is going to go on his quest to wrest the Silmarils from Morgoth, and then he gets there and just gets murdered, like straight up right away, killed on the battlefield. And it's kind of like, it's weirdly unceremonious. Now, I know this isn't a novel, and we're not doing character development and scenes in the same way that we would get in a novel. But all the same, he's a really pivotal figure in this story. And did it feel abrupt and weird that we just like, oh, I guess he's gone now?
Yeah, I mean, to your point, like, yeah, he's gone, but before he died, didn't he make his sons like take his oath or whatever?
So gosh.
They would continue to fight for the Silmarils, even though he realized like, we're never going to beat them. We're outmatched. We can't overtake the Lord of the Balrogs and all the other Balrogs or whatever. And like, this is basically a futile mission and effort. But you guys are still going to hold to your oath, and you're still going to fight for those Silmarils. And so his last dying breath kind of screws over the elves, because they have taken the oath and they have to honor that and keep fighting for it. So even though he's gone, the central conflict that he started will continue to be the central conflict for the elves. So he's kind of like his legacy remains, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing.
Oh yeah, no, I mean that's why I told you guys to highlight the oath of Fëanor and his 7 sons and the curse of Mandos. Like these things definitely go through the whole story. Yes, you're right. And I literally highlighted that passage and wrote down, dude, Fëanor is I'll say jerk. That's not what I wrote in the margins of my book, but he's a jerk. Because yeah, you're right, Kyle. He, with the foreknowledge of death, he perceives that no, we're never going to overcome Morgoth. He's the most powerful of the Valar, and
he keeps creating these crazy, crazy monsters that holy crap, we've never seen him before. Like also, he gets there and they meet the orcs. Like he's got a whole army of orcs, right? And that's the first time that I think, from what I gather, that the elves have run into orcs, right?
I'm not 100% sure about that. I'm not sure with the Noldor. I'd have to like really dig into their timeline, but it could be.
Because that was my thought, is like you show up and you're just like, whoa, what the heck are these things? And then it's just like, well, they're ugly and brutal. We should kill them all. That's basically the vibe I got as I'm reading this. And that's just cannon fodder level bad guys. And then you run into Balrogs and whatever other creatures that he's creating as we go forward. And so,
right.
I don't know, just a little bit selfish, Fëanor, to make people, or make your whole people continue to fight that futile battle. Yeah,
exactly. With the foreknowledge of death, he sees that Morgoth can never be overcome. And his 7 sons did take the oath with him in Aman. And so they are already bound by the oath. But he kind of like re-ups it. He recommits them to the oath on his deathbed. He's like, I don't know if he said, I mean, we have the record, so at some point he must have said, with the foreknowledge of death, this is never going to happen, but you're going to do it anyway. I don't know. Just what a jerk. What a guy. So let's see. Anything else on Fëanor?
Yeah, I got that quote for you right here.
Oh, okay, great.
He says, and he knew with the foreknowledge of death that no power of the Noldor would ever overthrow them, but he cursed the name of Morgoth thrice and laid it upon his sons to hold their oath and to avenge their father. You will avenge me, even though I know that you cannot actually make that happen. You will do it anyways.
Yeah. There you go. All right, Ryan, any thoughts before I bring up something else?
No, I mean, you asked whether or not it was surprising or abrupt for him to leave, and I think it makes sense that I don't think that it is all that, because it gives a new set of challenges for the elves to deal with. Otherwise, it's less of, the whole thing is just Fëanor's quest. It starts to become more narrative. It becomes more than versus a history where it's just like, he's gone and here's what they've been left with.
Right.
Kind of the point that Kyle was making there. And I think it makes sense that Fëanor has to go now. Otherwise, we're going to be too mired in the Noldor. We're in the Noldor story, but in Fëanor's story specifically.
Yeah.
Also, I think it's a, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not nearly as familiar with all of the works of Tolkien, but his writing style.
First of all, how dare you?
Well, I'm just not as well read or educated or have the flowing, luscious locks that you do. So
sure. I mean, who does?
But Tolkien tends to skip over like battle sequences and details quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And so the abruptness of Fëanor dying, it feels abrupt on the page because like he's chasing after this army, things happen, and all of a sudden he's on death's door, death's bed, right? But like if you look at like reading through the Battle of the Five Armies in The Hobbit, you don't like, it's like, and then there was a great battle, and like we skip past that. And so I don't know if it's just that Tolkien's less interested in like to your point, like the digging into the characterization and storytelling portion in that way, where you read other authors and like it's all about the blow by blow action sequences and here's what's going on and here's the motivations. So it seems to be somewhat of a theme in Tolkien's work that he kind of skips past certain things and hits like major beats. So it's like Fëanor was on this quest. He went to do this thing. Now he's no more. And here's how we're going forward,
Yeah.
So
I think of that. I think that's a great point. I think of it this way: the Silmarillion is a mythology or a history, if you prefer, and the Lord of the Rings, and to a lesser extent, the Hobbit. But the Lord of the Rings certainly is a romance, which means it is not going to get into the what today we might call grimdark details of, and then Aragorn cut off this head, he chopped off that limb, and he received, 7 wounds to his thigh. Whatever. I don't know. Whatever else goes on in these books. Cannonballs aren't blowing people's heads off in these scenes, because that's not what he's going for. Tolkien, and it's not because he didn't understand that stuff. I mean, Tolkien was on the Somme for months. So he's in World War I. He was in the thick of things, in one of the worst battles of the war. So I have no doubt he saw his fair share of what battle actually looks like when you dig down into the minute details, and he was not interested in transmitting that particular information. And so even with, say, The Lord of the Rings, when you get to those battle sequences, and like the Battle of Pelennor Fields would be a great example, or Helm's Deep or something, he tends not to zoom in very far. It's more about the romantic, heroic conception of war and battle, where, it's the forces of good versus the forces of evil, instead of Fëanor versus,
Five Balrogs
Jeffrey the Balrog or whatever. So the blow-by-blow stuff, I think we would expect that and want that from an author today, but he just wasn't interested for various reasons, I'm sure. I don't know. Thoughts and feelings?
No, I think that's kind of what I was trying to articulate, and I think you did a better job of it. It feels abrupt on the page because Tolkien is ready to move to the next thing. He doesn't want to dwell on whatever's happening, like in the moment necessarily. So to a reader who is expecting a narrative in that way, it could feel abrupt, but I think it's done intentionally, not necessarily that he's intending to be abrupt. He's just what's interesting to Tolkien and what's important in Tolkien's mind to tell the story is moving on from Fëanor to the next thing.
Right.
If you're 13 chapters into this and you're still like, where's my narrative? You probably should just put the book down.
Yep.
That's a good point.
Fair.
Well, and also let me point this out. We're going to get through the Silmarillion. We'll get to our very last section, which will be the War of the Ring, kind of the what do they call it, of the Third Age and the War of the Ring or something like that. And of the Rings of Power. There you go. And that chronicles the creation of the rings, the whole Third Age, and it even gives you a few pages on
the upcoming Amazon series.
Exactly. It gives you a few pages on the War of the Ring, which is the story of the Lord of the Rings, essentially. And so you get the same kind of sketch for the Lord of the Rings in the Silmarillion that we get for all these other different episodes. And he obviously then spent 17 years fleshing out the Lord of the Rings, writing that out. So if he had turned his mind in the same way to telling the story of Fëanor charging Angband, or freeing Maethros from the rock, Fingon going and freeing him from the rock, like he could tell those stories in more detail. But yeah, like you say, it's more important just to move on. We got a lot of history to get through, and he did. Like, that's why we have things like these secondary or tertiary posthumous books like The Fall of Gondolin or Beren and Luthien, where he did actually dig in and write out a bunch of that stuff. He never quite finished them, and it was up to his son Christopher to go in and make sure that it was all publishable. But yeah, he did start the process of Lord of the Ringsifying some of these Silmarillion episodes. So
yes, and you're gonna have to fact check me on this, but I'm hoping I'm about to blow your mind.
I'm ready.
Jeffrey the Balrog is actually named Gothmog.
Correct.
Lord of the Balrogs.
Yes. That is correct. Gothmog.
Also Jeff.
It's Jeff with a G. But he got tired of people getting Gothmog wrong. So he's like, it's Jeff, guys. It's Jeff.
Went to Starbucks and they're like, Gothmog? Jeffrey. Okay.
I was thinking of his sidekick.
Yes.
Yeah. His Samwise was Jeffrey. Okay, so I also want to point out something that that came to my attention in this read through, which is that we are, as we're talking about Tolkien skipping over a lot of things and then spending more time here and then zooming through whatever parts of the history so far. one thing I've noticed on this read through is how he just kind of skips the happy times. Anytime things are going really well, it might get a sentence or a paragraph of mention. And hey, everybody was super happy.
We entered the time of peace.
Yeah. The trees are lit and everybody's having a good time.
He was tired about writing about the Shire and all the happiness in the Shire from the other works that he did. And he was just like, all right, learn my lesson there.
But anyway, what was I going to say? Oh yeah. So in chapter 13, in that second edition, that purple one, it's page 108, but who knows where it really is. It mentions that the ages of the stars were ended. And that line caught my eye. Okay, so the ages of the stars. Obviously, we have the rising of the sun and moon. We had the trees in Valinor, but they didn't light Middle Earth. So Middle Earth was under the stars, the starlight. Anyway, so that got me thinking about it. And what I know about this book is that this is not so much a history of the elves in their prime time as the elves already in their decline. So we do get their time in Valinor, which is, he calls it the noontide of Valinor, the noontide of the elves. It's them at their highest, glory and power and wisdom and all that stuff. But he really does kind of zoom through that. And most of our time in Valinor, if you recall, seems to have been spent talking about Morgoth and him kind of seeding rebellion, and Fëanor and him growing in pride, and eventually the Noldor leaving, and the schisms and fighting and all that stuff that happens, where it's like, so you're in paradise and that's what we get to read about. It's not paradise being paradise, it's paradise being destroyed. And this is kind of, I mean, this is normal, right? This is what interesting stories are. Stories come out of times of transition, and that's what we're reading about here, is the elves on the decline. It's a transition period. And when we have transition, that's movement, it's friction, it's heat, it creates interest. Whereas you can be as happy as you want, but that's not going to make a very good story. And same thing with being, the ultimate of ultimate tragedies, not that good a story. It's transition, either decline or ascension. That's where story comes in. So I thought that was, I kind of knew that somewhere in my head, but that line really jumped out to me, that the ages of the stars were ended. So anyway, all right. So I guess we'll just pay attention to that. If there are any more slow sections after this, I wonder if we can track, because nothing's actually happening. Everybody's just chilling and being happy. Mm-hmm. So anyway, all right. You guys, anything else to bring up before we get to listener questions and whatnot?
Is this our first mention of the eagles?
Good question.
I feel like they might have been mentioned as that they were created, but this is our first time I feel like they've interacted with our story.
Yeah, I think I feel like the creation of them was there, but I don't remember anything else.
We actually have the Lord of the Eagles coming down,
Thorondor,
and bringing
Ron Henley.
Well played, sir.
Have you seen Peacemaker on HBO Max?
No, I have not.
Oh, okay.
Should I?
Yeah. If you have a high tolerance for adult humor.
Oh yeah.
Adult juvenile humor. How's that?
Excellent.
So, because I want to call him Don Eagley.
Don Eagley. Let's do it.
Yeah. Okay. Never mind. People who have seen the show are laughing their butts off right now. Okay. All right. What
I
were you saying, Ryan?
Ryan, with a stupid Eagles reference.
It's probably worth more than what I had to bring up about it. It was just, I noticed the Eagles, and one of the portions that jumped out to me on this was the story of Mithros being chained up, and then having basically he asks to be killed because he's been suffering there, and instead of doing that, he cuts off the hand, and he ends up kind of rejuvenating his life and becomes an even better swordsman with his other hand. And
boy, that sounded like a euphemism if I ever heard one.
Well, you got to make do with what you got. So.
Yeah, there you go.
but the fact that the Lord of the Eagles came in, it just, that little mini story in there was interesting to me, and it connected, because I think part of it connected to me into Greek mythology, of the, who was it that was chained to the rock that was eaten?
Oh gosh, yeah, names. I know the story, but names.
Yeah,
sorry.
That Greek mythology piece of the man who was chained to the rock that was being eaten, his liver was being eaten every day, and I think Hercules eventually had to come and. There's someone who's
at least in the
right
cartoon
now.
version, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Kevin Sorbo went and he pulled the chain, and
Ryan at thelegendariumpodcast.com.
I wish I would have looked it up before I came here, but this is just one of those moments where I thought, is this story a nod to other myths and other legends that could potentially have some connection to what he was trying to build?
Yeah, I love that. I hadn't even thought of that, but I love that connection because we kind of talked about this a couple episodes ago, I think, where Tolkien loved proto versions of things, especially language, but also stories and, children's songs and all that stuff. And so,
Prometheus.
I think, was it Prometheus?
Yeah.
Okay. So I could definitely see him saying, "Yeah, man, that was really, it's a great myth. It's a great story. What if I made up the prehistoric version of what actually happened that became the myth that the Greeks started telling?" He loved that kind of stuff. So I could definitely see that for sure. Yeah, good catch. I like it. All right. So before we do listener questions, you guys want word of the day right now?
Yes.
All right, so I've got a few words of the day. These ones all come from chapter 13 because everything interesting comes from chapter 13 for this particular reading. All right, how about this one? Fey, F-E-Y. I got to see if I can actually find the passage. I left my notated book inside, but Fey, do you guys know that one?
Yeah, isn't it just another form of all the other forms of Fey? Fairy and Fey, F-A-E, F-E-Y.
Nice. This is why I'm bringing it up. It is not. So F-A-Y, Fey, yes, you're right. It's kind of another way to talk about fairy, another name for something of fairy. But that comes from Old French. That came to us through French. But F-E-Y is actually Old English, and the definition is giving an impression of vague otherworldliness. That comes from, Oxford dictionaries on Google. So... giving an impression of vague otherworldliness. I really need to find the passage now. I'm not sure I'll be able to quickly enough, but they both kind of came from the same spot. But the next one is van, V-A-N. And it is the foremost part of a company of people moving or preparing to move forward, especially the foremost division of an advancing military force. So these both, that's right, because it's when Fëanor runs ahead of the army. He gets ahead of the van of the army, and, and he's laughing as, one Fey or something. I don't know, yeah.
For he was Fey, consumed by the flame of his own wrath.
There you go. Yeah, Ryan's got me covered. So that's why I need...
Searchable on Kindle.
Yeah, I know. My paperback, not quite the same thing. But and then what's the next sentence?
For he was Fey, consumed by the flame of his own wrath. Thus it was that he drew far ahead of the van of his host, and seeing this, the servants of Morgoth turned to bay, and there issued from Angband Balrogs to aid them.
Yep, there you go. So, van, we know the term vanguard as something that goes before. Mm-hmm. And I guess in medieval battles, they would often split their armies into three groups. The vanguard, and I want to say it's the Midgard, but that sounds more like, Norse myth. So it might be a different word. And the rear guard. Mm-hmm. So the van was the one up front. That's all. So they would often just leave off the guard part of that and just say the van. So that's where that comes from. The last one comes from a little bit later in that...
down by the river.
In that page. Ryan, I want you to look up constrained. Should be right around that same page. The word is constrained. And this one is not because it's such a terribly difficult word, but just a pet peeve of mine that constrained, Kyle, you editor man, is not the same as restrained.
No.
Can you tell me the difference?
Nope.
No? All right. Ryan, do you have it?
Probably not the difference you're looking for.
I do. Let's see. But the sons of Fëanor knew that Morgoth would betray them and would not release Maedhros. Would not release Momo, whatsoever they might do, and they were constrained also by their oath, and might not for any cause forsake the war against their enemy.
Yeah. So, yeah, I only bring this up just, like I said, as a personal pet peeve, that these are not the same thing. They're often used interchangeably, but they don't mean the opposite, but they're kind of like two different sides of a coin, where to be restrained, obviously, is to be held back from something or kept from something. But to be constrained is to be forced into something. So you can think of it like if somebody's restraining you, they're pulling you back, they're holding you. But if you're being constrained, you're being pushed, by someone or something else. So anyway, there's your words of the day. All right, I'll take off my stupid professor hat now. Just kidding.
It looks good on you.
I'm not going to do that. All right, should we do some listener stuff?
Let's do some listener stuff.
First one comes from our 10-year-old listener, Elliot. Okay, so
Elliot.
We missed out on Elliot's last week because it was last episode because it was a weird week and the timing was off. So I apologize for that. But Elliot, we're gonna go to you first. Elliot asks, why did Melkor create the Iron Mountains to defend himself if he's a god?
Because he's fighting other gods.
There you go.
They're on an even playing field.
And even if he wasn't, I mean, he's a total coward.
Sure.
And he is a god, and yet when Fëanor and all the Noldor show up, he retreats.
Mm-hmm.
He gives a battle, but once the battle is lost, he goes and locks his doors, and he ain't coming out for anything.
Elliot, I'm not sure if you have siblings, but when you go to your room and shut your door and lock your siblings out because you want to do your own thing and create your own Lego set or whatever it is, Melkor or Morgoth just wants to go back into his room and shut the door, create Balrogs and dragons, and then go back and wreak havoc on his siblings.
There you go. All right. So thanks for putting horrible, violent ideas into Elliot's head.
That's what I'm here for.
So, no, I mean, it's a decent question. Why bother? You're a god. Why do you need mountains? Why do you need walls?
But they all are gods.
Protection it's not necessarily protecting yourself from being killed or anything like that either. There's just the leave me alone, kind of what Kyle was talking about, locking yourself in the room, but just trying to keep things out so that you can get away with doing things too. Like, I'm building a curtain around me, an iron curtain that says,
so to speak.
Yes. So you can't see what I'm doing. So when I come out, I have an upper hand of surprise.
Right.
Too. Mm-hmm. Like, there's that element of it as well.
Yeah. And also all of his underlings are not gods. He's got orcs and creatures and whatnot that are perfectly killable.
He has a strategic advantage behind the Iron Mountains.
Yeah. And
he would
we should
not otherwise.
point out that the other Valar do the exact same thing. The Pelori, the mountains barring the way into Aman, they're massive, sheer-faced mountains that are unclimbable, and there's only one pass, and they set that up as protection. And they're probably not just thinking of Morgoth in that case. There's, you may be a god, but that doesn't mean you can't be threatened. And, we'll get there in this story. We'll get there. It's good.
Maybe it was just like a real estate bad neighbor thing. Like, I built up a fence. Now I'm going to build up a bigger fence, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that. And
do you think that he made the Noldor pay for half?
Yeah.
And put up the Iron Mountains and this is your half of the fence, bro.
Yep.
All right, guys, we're going back to chapter 14.
Okay.
Because Lady Sweden has a comment or two here. All right. This is Lady Sweden. There are info dumps in fantasy, and then there's chapter 14 of the Silmarillion. History, genealogy, and geography delivered shamelessly and proudly to a confused reader. This one had eyes mildly glazed over by the end. So boring. With that said, who on the panel admits to skimming? And she also adds, "Come on, Craig.
I didn't read it at all."
She says, "Even you must do this. Is there a need for this chapter?" So wait, you guys both skimmed 14?
Oh, I didn't read chapter 14. I read the synopsis and something else for chapter 14 because we had already talked about it. We were like, this is going to be a word map, and I was like, deuces, I'm out.
I have had every single word of chapter 14 pass into my ears, and probably somewhere around 1,000 of them through my eyes. Of that, about 7 have stayed.
Ryan had his speaker on the back of his neck with the gentle fan blowing, just sweet nothings in the back of the nape of
The
back.
Silmarillion coming through
Ryan's
bone
neck,
induction
just-
headphones is a
exactly.
little bit...
Wow.
He wanted to experience.
Oh no. So okay, well there's your answer, Lady Sweden.
2 different approaches.
I read the whole thing quite closely. Although I will say, if you look at, and I wish I had my notated copy out here. If you look at my notes for chapter 13, it's like, 5, 6 marginal notes on every single page, tons of stuff underlined and cross-referenced and all that stuff. And it gets to chapter 14, it's pretty dry.
Yep.
I don't have many notes on chapter 14. So
I want to know if there is someone out there that is a diehard lover of chapter 14 that would be willing to do a in defense of chapter 14
Oh, yeah, no, I'd
discussion.
love that.
Like, here's what's important to know about it and why it matters, and here's this sort of thing. And stop crapping all over it, guys. And
I mean, to Craig's earlier point about like they put the map, like the actual drawn map in the book, and even what's his name, Christopher, and publishers were like, we'll put like 30% of that in there. So like, I don't know that there's anybody out there that can defend it. 'Cause
yeah, well, there's
even the people that put it together were like, nah.
there's so much info in that chapter that you couldn't. You'd have to have a map. It'd have to be at least 3 times this size. To be able to get all that info in there. So, no, I just think. I don't hate chapter 14. It does have good stuff in there. It has little tidbits of info to pull out. It really does. But it is so much fun to crap on. And so here we are. Deal with it. If this offends you, I'm sorry. But so yeah, they skimmed over it. She says, "Come on, Craig, even you must do this." On a normal read through, I might skim a little bit more. But on this read through, no, I was pretty intent on reading every word carefully. So. And it really did feel very long because of that. So, all right. So Lady Sweden also said, she says also, if Craig is feeling extra evil, a name quiz from chapter 14 would be in place.
go for it. It's going to be
So to that end, I have
Oh, goodness gracious.
a quiz for you guys right here. It's 5 questions, multiple choice. And I decided I was like, how can I be kind of cruel, but not totally cruel? And so what this is, I have 5 questions. Each of them is a group of 4 names. You just need to choose the one that is not a real name from the Silmarillion.
Oh, no.
Okay.
All of the real ones occur in chapter 14.
Are the fake
Okay.
ones prescriptions?
They are not. They are, I literally just made up words that might kind of go. We'll see how you do. Okay, so are you ready for question number 1? Or group number 1?
Mm-hmm.
All right. We have Ered Engrin, Mithrim, Gilmarian, and Nargothrond.
The Nargothrond I know exists.
Yeah, so does Mithrim. It's
So the other ones are
Galmarian.
Ered Engrin or Gilmarian.
I'm going to go with Ered Engrim is the fake one.
I was going to go with Galmarian.
Kyle is correct. That is correct. All right, group number 2 is Galadriel, Brethil, Linaiwin, or Thangorodrim.
Do that one more time.
Breathium.
Galadriel, Brethil,
Oh, Breathium.
Linaiwin, or Thangorodrim.
Linaiwin.
I'm sticking with Breathy.
Galadriel is not a thing. That is not that is something I made up out of whole cloth. All right, group number 3. All right, we'll see if we can get through 3 more of these. Dorthonian, Ardgalen, Hisilome, or Gaithriennan. All right.
Hisilome.
Hisilome.
The first one.
All right. Incorrect. Gaithriennan is not a thing. That I just completely made up some elvish sounds. Elf-ish sounds. All right. Heathlum, Tolbaranduin, Ered Lomin, or Nevrast.
Heath Ledger.
I don't believe he exists.
Well,
I'll go with the last one.
It was Tolbaranduin. So the Baranduin is the Elvish name for the Brandywine River in Hobbiton, or not outside of Hobbiton, by the Shire, the borders of the Shire. All right, last one, you guys, last one. All right, so pay attention. This is your last chance. I think Kyle got one so far. That's so you're in the lead.
Yeah.
All right, so last one.
We're all winning on this one.
All right.
Especially the listeners.
Tolsirion, Eglarest, Loselbriand, or Brithombar?
Eglarest.
Lo celebrum.
Yes, Ryan is correct. We have ourselves a tie, ladies and gentlemen.
An elf off.
So, yeah. Anyway, that was for Lady Sweden. I hope she enjoyed this torture session. All right. Well, Kyle, you might not even know. If all you did was read a synopsis of chapter 14, you might not understand the avalanche of names that comes at you.
No, I wasn't about to do that.
It's totally fine.
I wanted to retain what I learned from chapter 13 and not get it convoluted with whatever the heck you just said.
Yeah.
Any of those names.
I can't think of any events off the top of my head. It's more just like in chapter 14, it's more like this is where that thing happened that you read in chapter 10 or 11. Mm-hmm. Or this is the thing this is the place where something is going to happen in chapter 17. But we're not there yet.
You know what would be cool though? Is if that place where that thing happened in chapter 10 came up in chapter 10. Or like, we're going to talk about a thing in chapter 17. Maybe in chapter 17 we say, here's where we are. Well,
they do. They do.
Just saying.
Yeah. All right. So let's go on with another question. We got a bunch from Deepholt. Is always reliable with the question dumps. Mm-hmm. So Deepholt, thank you very much. Let's see. He notes, we see Galadriel here discussing matters with Melian. They seem to share some kind of close bond. Galadriel is probably the oldest character in The Lord of the Rings, save for Sauron and perhaps Gandalf, to play a major role. And we are already seeing her as a noteworthy figure this early in the timeline. Could she perhaps be thought of as the main character of Tolkien's mythos, if one had to be chosen? So if Tolkien had a main character, would it be Galadriel? It's a decent question. I like this question.
I'm gonna say
she'd be the Hoyd of Tolkien's works.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm gonna say no, and my answers to who the main character is actually I take it back. That might not work. That doesn't work anymore.
So,
because I actually think Morgoth makes a better case for being. We follow him for more of the story,
right?
Than what Galadriel is. But if it's like, but he's the villain, so he can't be the main. Well, by time on page and impact.
Somebody tell that to Walter White. Oh, you never saw Breaking Bad, did you?
No, I've never seen Breaking Bad.
Yeah, your main character can easily be the villain. Mm-hmm. No, I think, I'm with you. No, the answer is no. She's not the main character. This is not a foolish thing to think, but no, ultimately I would say certainly not. Morgoth, you got a stronger case there. I'm going to go meta on this one.
Middle Earth.
No, the main character, and I'm dead serious about this. The main character of Tolkien's mythology is Jesus. Once you really dig into it and get into what he was doing as a matter of subcreation and types of Christ and all that stuff that he was doing, the main character of Middle Earth is Jesus. Like it or not,
Jeffrey the Balrog.
Not Jeffrey the Balrog. I wish. Okay, can we have a sitcom now? I need one of our talented listeners to create the 80s or 90s sitcom like theme song for Jeffrey the Balrog.
Yep.
So we'll get someone to draw up a ridiculous looking Balrog. I've got character animator. We'll voice him. We'll create a little side thing.
All right. So Huron fan asks, and that name will make a lot more sense. Oh man, so soon for you guys. I'm really looking forward to it. Huron fan asks, this probably isn't an episode worthy question. Well, I tagged it anyway, so you write it down. I'm going to ask it. But I noticed Tolkien genders Gelion male, Gelion being a river in Beleriand. Are all rivers male? and it's the first I've noticed? Or is this a thing he made up or took from Old English or other languages he knows? So, again, because you guys didn't like really dig into chapter 14, you might not have even noticed this. But sometimes he will give a
Hey, in
river.
Ryan's defense, he read it twice in 2 mediums. All right? Just saying.
So, hey, I'm not.
I've hit that wall multiple times. I'm good.
Yeah, what was I going to say? Oh, yeah. Sometimes he genders inanimate objects like rivers, and sometimes he doesn't. And so,
in this case, gender would be fluid.
Thank you for listening to the Legendarium. Go to subscribe and Patreon.
Seriously,
and
do we have
whatever
to continue this episode?
Like
this is bullshit.
These mics are fixed to the table. We will figure out how to drop them.
I don't want to keep recording. This is dumb. All right. Well, so the question is, are all rivers male? And it's first time I've noticed. No, it's not. No, it's, I don't know. I think it's a common thing mythologically. And it's also, it could be a thing where when he was creating his Elvish languages, if certain things get gendered for one reason or another, sometimes it's historical reasons, and sometimes it's just straight up linguistic reasons. Like if you speak any Romance languages, there's no correlation between why is a garbage can female and a trombone is male. This doesn't make any sense.
I will say, in Spanish, water and river would be gendered in, it's a male gendered term.
Right.
So,
but I don't think he got really into gendering in that way with his languages. But I'm no Elvish scholar, so I couldn't tell you for sure. But it could be a leftover from an early iteration of Elvish that the River Gelion was, male gendered, or it could just be, it could have something to do with the Maya that was associated with that river early on. Like the sun and moon are gendered in Tolkien. So the sun is female and the moon is male, which is actually, it's kind of fun to read the French version of The Lord of the Rings because they have to put a notation at the bottom of the page when Legolas refers to La Soleil, which is incorrect. He refers to it as a female sun, but in French, the sun is male. And they had to put a little note on there, like actually in Middle Earth, the sun is literally female. So, anyway, so little things like that, like it could just be a mythological thing. Anyway, so Huron fan wasn't sure. It said this probably isn't an episode worthy question. Well, I sure showed you. Okay, Huron fan. So how dare you? No more throat clearing. Just ask your questions. I love them. All right. Let's do another one from Deepolt. Dragons. We're getting our first mention of dragons here. They are intelligent, if Smaug is of any indication. However, this Glaurung, where did he come from? Was there an intelligent race of reptilian beings that Morgoth had corrupted, akin to how he, quote unquote, created the orcs? So
I'm pretty sure it says that he created him, didn't he? And then he was let loose on accident.
Right. Like before.
Yeah, or before he wanted him to be let loose, basically.
Right. Yeah.
Because I think when he was let loose, he was only about half as big as he was supposed to be.
Right.
Is that right?
Yep.
And he didn't have wings. He was not a wingaling dragon.
There's like a
dragon.
There are a lot of dragons that we'll come across. Some of them have wings. Some of them have legs. Some of them breathe fire. And some of them,
which Glaurung does.
Right. Some of them, none of these things. Or some mix and match, whatever. So yeah, there's a lot of different types of dragons, and there is no official consensus on where the dragons came from. It's a great question. Where did these dragons come from? And I will say, so somebody got mad at me for saying in the last episode or 2 episodes ago that Ungoliant was a Maya, but that one's, it's like all inferences point to Ungoliant being one of the Maiar. Is that officially stated? No, but it's pretty strong inference. With the dragons, it's a lot weaker. There's nothing I can point to say like, yeah, this is probably the case. But there are a few different theories, and here's my favorite one. You guys ready?
Mm-hmm.
So Sauron, this is I'm not kidding. This is a real theory that people have out there. I'm not making this up. Sauron is a shapeshifter. Now I think he's done some shapeshifting up to this point in the story. I'm not totally sure, but he's definitely going to do a lot, like in Beren and Luthien. Ryan, you might remember that. Mm-hmm. So this is going to come into play. And one of the shapes that he is said to shift into is that of a serpent, which is another name for dragon in these stories. And so somebody had okay, so how does Morgoth create dragons? Because he can't create sentient life. But now we have the model of Ungoliant creating this kind of like race of malevolent giant spiders, right? So Ungoliant may be a Maya. Sorry, whoever disagrees with me on that. But she may be a Maya, but she's able to still procreate and kind of birth this race of giant spiders, right? So the theory is that Morgoth has Sauron turn into a dragon and mate with some other kind of lizard creature and kind of birth the race of dragons and do this enough times that you have a self-sustaining race of dragons. Is this likely? I don't know, but it's so ridiculous and fun that I kind of like it and I want it to be canon.
I just imagine that Morgoth, calls Sauron into his office. Hey, Sauron,
here's your sitcom.
I have a request for you. Yes, Darklord, whatever you need. I'm happy to do it. You do that shape-shifting thing? Yeah. Yes, I do. Well, would you mind being a lizard? No, I'm totally happy with that.
See, I'm just imagining him like, that shape-shifting thing, and then he just like pulls a lizard out of his pocket. Just puts it on the desk.
Can you do this, but bigger?
Can you do this?
A little bit bigger. Bigger. Now, I've got something in the closet. I need you to do some things with it. I know it's going to be awkward, but just trust me, long term, it's going to be amazing.
It'll be worth it in the end. He literally, Angband is literally called Hell. So 7 minutes in Hell with Sauron and some lizards. There you go.
Yikes.
Mega yikes. So
make sure you watch out for the fire. We don't want that getting in there.
So it's a good question. Where do the dragons come from? We don't know for sure. We're going to see a lot more of the dragons. We're going to see a lot more just bananas stuff that goes on with dragons in this.
It does say that Glaurung has no wings. He still has breath of fire, and his mere presence defiles things.
That is accurate.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay. Just ask Sauron. So let's see. Okay, here's another one from Deephold. Is the new map we get of Beleriand in the same region of the world as the lands we know from The Lord of the Rings? Rohan, Gondor, the Misty Mountains, etc. Could one figure out what locations here will go on to become the lands of the Third Age without too much difficulty, if so? So do you guys, have you bothered to compare maps and kind of figure out what's going on there map-wise?
No.
Okay. So
I mean, I've looked at the map that has been presented and was like, is any of this familiar with the Middle-earth map that I am familiar with? It was a pretty quick no, and then that's about as far as my thought process went until I went into chapter 15.
Right. So no, these locations in Beleriand are not the same as what we see in The Lord of the Rings, with one exception. And that exception, if you pull up a map of Middle Earth, see if I can pull up a decent map here. If you go to the Ered Luin, the Blue Mountains in the Middle Earth map, so we're talking Lord of the Rings times, in the far northwest of Middle Earth, kind of west of the Shire, there's this mountain range, and the sea kind of has an inlet that cuts through these mountains. Okay, so you got a little pass with the sea there. Those mountains are in the far east of Beleriand. So everything that we're reading about, the Blue Mountains get mentioned a few times, but not in great detail. So essentially everything we're reading about in Beleriand seems to no longer exist by the time of The Lord of the Rings. So that mountain range in the far west in The Lord of the Rings is in the far east in Beleriand, and the rest of it is underwater. Why? We'll get there. So...
This is the Atlantis story.
Well, there. I mean, we definitely have an Atlantis story. We will get there. Yeah, I'll tell you when we get there. It's not about spoilers. It's just about, I think we're going to have a lot of fun with that. And I don't want to don't want to shoot my shot before we get to that spot. So, all right. Jesse L had a couple of thoughts, not questions so much as just, observations. So Jesse L says, I like Fëanor in spite of his flaws and his relentless pursuit of Morgoth. Not a fan of Thingol for forbidding the use of the Noldor's language. All right,
we haven't really touched on much of, what is it, 15?
Yeah.
Where Quenya gets outlawed because you killed my brothers and friends.
Right. Yeah, I think we'll get there. Let's take these one at a time. So from Jesse L, the first one is, I like Fëanor in spite of his flaws. Do you guys like Fëanor? I always find myself hating him. Just the pride.
I don't know if I like him, but I don't know that I like him because of who he is. I like him because he's familiar to me as a reader, and he's the person I can latch onto and be like, okay, I know what the heck's going on now.
Right.
So like, anytime we get back to Fëanor and we're reading about Fëanor, I'm like, oh, cool, this is what I was looking for, right? So, but I don't know that I would say it's because I care for Fëanor as a character or decision maker.
Right. Ryan?
No, I don't have a strong distaste for him, but I don't really love him either. Because he is one of those characters that from his very creation, he has always been that Draco Malfoy. Like,
if Hermione and Draco had a baby.
There you go. Yeah.
The cleverest a-hole of his age.
That's kind of the thing. And so there's enough about his personality and his decision-making process that I'm like, you are terrible. You are a terrible person or terrible elf, and you deserve all the terrible things that are going to happen to you. But at the same time, I'm like, at least you're doing something. You're adventuring. You're trying to accomplish something. I appreciate that. I recognize your go you type A personality elf, and you achieve.
You know what it reminds me of? The way that we sometimes think about and talk about people who are very, very talented or influential in the real world. So, whether it's, it might be Steve Jobs or some, musician or something where Steve Jobs, I don't know much about Steve Jobs' personal life. So I'm just saying some genius in some field, we'll often think like, oh man, they were so gifted in this area and gave so much to humanity. And then you dig into their life and you're like, oh no. Like, like whatever you do, if you love Gandhi, don't learn about Gandhi. It's a terrible idea. Like, I don't want to get too much into that, but like he did some amazing things for which he is properly revered. Let's let it lie there, So Fëanor maybe would fit into that crowd where it's like, hey, he created the Silmarils. He preserved the light, the light of the Blessed Realm for all time in these jewels. Amazing. He slew how many Teleri? He burned what ships?
So far we've got him as Draco Malfoy, Gandhi, and now we're adding Christopher Columbus to the mix as like people that this man is like.
Right. So yeah. Anyway. Yeah. No, I think it's good. So the next one was about. So let's see. First it was Fëanor. Oh, and then Jesse says, not a fan of Thingol for forbidding the use of the Noldor's language. All right. So this leads into one of my questions, which is Thingol unreasonable? And I use that word advisedly. Is he unreasonable? So in chapter 13, we have when the Noldor show up, they send messengers, and Thingol is like, okay, well, you're allowed to settle here and over here, but everything south of this river, everything over here, everything in, around these woods, don't even think about it. I am the Lord of Middle Earth. Don't, step off, biznatch, is Thingol's attitude. And then in chapter 15, when he finds out about the kinslaying, when he finds out about the burning of the ships and the crossing of the great ice, in the north, he forbids the use of Quenya. essentially, which is what the Noldor speak. And says, anybody in Middle-earth, every elf in Middle-earth must speak Sindarin. So, yeah, is he unreasonable? Does this make him a bad guy? Or is this kind of a natural and understandable and decent reaction to what he finds out?
I'm going to tread into dangerous waters. I'm going to say it's actually very, very smart. Whether it's unreasonable or not, I think it's in an age where we are aiming to be more accepting, more everything. This feels like a really bad move. But one of the best ways you can break off a group and make sure that it's not integrating, to make sure, or to try and keep an us and them mentality, which he's kind of doing with this, is to make it so you cannot communicate. There's stories of the Tower of Babel story,
right.
of like confounding languages so you cannot achieve your goals. Like for him to say no Quenya will be spoken in Middle Earth is basically saying, if you speak it, I know who you are, where you're from, and I can make all my snap judgments based on that fact alone. And I'm not going to let it become something that messes with my setup here. Like it's very, very smart, rather than just like chasing him off or doing this. But it's not kind. It's not benevolent. It's not anything.
What we would consider morally upright, perhaps.
I don't condone it, but I understand it.
No, and that's why I said unreasonable.
Yeah.
So it's because, like you said, it's smart, and that's what I mean in this case by reasonable. He is doing something that has a purpose that he has reasoned out, presumably. It kind of in the text, often things sound like a snap judgment, but it's like, Thingol probably sat on his throne for 85 years as a stone and then came to his decision. I don't know, whatever. But as you say, Ryan, it's smart because it does create that us versus them thing where he probably recognized, okay, so they're elves, we're elves. There's going to be a lot of integrating going on. This pot be a Melton, and who's going to come out on top? That's, it's one tool in your belt to make sure that your people come out on top. If your language is the one that gets spoken. So, yeah. No, I like your answer, Ryan. Morally upright? Nah, maybe not. Not by our lights.
Strategically sound.
Yeah, there you go. Kyle, anything to add?
No, I think that's very well articulated. Well, I mean, I'm thinking, maybe I have a little bit to add. I'm thinking of it in like a modern day perspective where, we've historically in the United States been really bad about having dual immersion integration into our education system for a long, long time. But why? A lot of other countries teach English in their education programs.
Right.
And it's a similar vein. And is it just pride and unwillingness to say like, we're going to learn these other languages, or what is it? So I think it's a similar vein of thinking where if there is a common language that is used, to Ryan's point, you can have better relationships and work together and have strategic goals and whatever. But when you purposely make the decision to exclude a form of communication, you're drawing a line. So I don't have anything really beyond that to add, but that's where my mind was going as you guys were talking, was like, we have a very much modern day equivalent of that. Right. I taught dual immersion language in school for a while, and it was always a weird thing to me that like, why didn't I have an opportunity growing up in my elementary school to learn multiple languages? Because somebody somewhere at some point Thingoled the United States and said, we will only speak English, and that is all we will teach. Right.
No, I think you're really onto something. The only pushback I would give to that is that we didn't have a Thingol. That's one difference between, what we're reading in the Silmarillion is essentially like a great man version of history, right? This person made this decision and therefore society went this way. Whereas, these days there's nobody really at the helm. That's not a thing. That's where conspiracy theories fall apart. Is like, this isn't a thing that somebody did or could do.
Sure.
But I think there is a similar dynamic where, in the U.S. especially, a lot of people are like, well, I don't need to. I'm not going to, my kids aren't going to move anywhere. We're not going to emigrate. We're not going to, and all the economic opportunity, for a long time, obviously this isn't so much the case these days, but all the economic opportunities here. My kids don't need to learn French, even though that was the lingua franca of Europe for, 300 or 400 years or more than that. They don't need to learn French because that's not going to help them. That's why, like my niece, she does go to dual immersion in Chinese because her parents were like, hey, that might open up some doors for you to learn Chinese. But that's not a widespread cultural thing because this has been the center of gravity culturally
and it's
for a long
definitely
time.
Becoming more widespread over the last several years, but it hasn't been for centuries.
Right. Anyway, yeah. Anyway, my point is that, yeah, you're onto something, that there's a parallel there, but the difference is that Thingol, in this case, is one guy who says, from the top down, thus shall it be, but with the same kind of effect, which is to say, I want our people to be dominant, therefore it will be our language that's spoken.
Well, I mean, it's exactly what, was it Julius Caesar that did, no, it wasn't Julius Caesar. When did they decide that Christianity would be the religion of the empire?
In like the 5th century or 4th
yeah, so
century?
it's the same idea there, where it's like you will be Christian if you're part of the Roman Empire. That is our official religion. If
We're tired of feeding you to lions.
Or so it's when you have that that singular dictator or ruler, because he had the same thing with the Anglican Church, where the king was like, I'm done with that. My own thing. Everybody here is now going to be that.
Right.
Anyways.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just not something that can occur in our society today. We don't have that. We don't have a person with that kind of authority. So
you can all stay home. I disagree with that. You can all stay home and not go to work because of a pandemic mandated.
Oh gosh. Well, let's.
Have you seen the power that people like Kim Kardashian wield?
You have no power here, Kim Kardashian. All right, so we're way far afield now. I feel like this is probably, it's not a good place to wrap it up,
no,
but it's a place that we have to wrap it up. So, yeah, you have no power here, Kim Kardashian, and we're done. So, if you enjoyed this episode, except for the last 5 minutes or so, please go to thelegendarium.com. Go check out our wares there. And I should also mention, I keep forgetting to put this at the top of the episodes. If you are in the Pacific Northwest, or if you can be in the Pacific Northwest around, is it Memorial Day weekend? Yeah, the end of May. We are going to do a Legendarium meetup in Portland that weekend. So that Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It'll be mostly Saturday, but we'll hang out Friday night, Sunday morning. So we'd love for you to go there. You can check out details at thelegendarium.com. It's just going to be a fun, laid-back weekend where we're all getting together, talking fantasy. We'll do live shows and panels and whatnot with, all the people who show up. So anyway, would love to see everybody there. All right, guys, have a good one, and I will see you for the next Silmarillion episode.